ahead and get started. My name is Andy Cordes, and I'm a project facilitator, external coach down in Clark County School District. Thank you for joining me. A small group because it's we're talking about alt ed today. The good thing is the results, I can speak to alt ed. I've coached at both comprehensive campuses and alt education. So I can speak for alt ed because that's where the data is coming from today. But anything that we talk about and work on today can actually be applied to a comprehensive campus from elementary, middle, and secondary. I think it's kind of nice seeing it in the alt ed because aren't some of those people and some of those populations are some of the most skeptical of folks. So who do we have that is in alt ed now? That is in some sort of either juvenile justice setting or... So is everyone from comprehensive campuses? Good. That's good then. Okay. Elementary, raise your hand. Middle? High school? Okay. Are mostly external coaches? Counselors? Administrators? Teachers? Okay. Okay. So thanks to the Nevada Department of Education, Clark County School District, Jody Sirocco, our state person that comes out and helps us and actually turned me on to and introduced me to this tool that I'm going to talk about today. Kevin Filter, if you're interested in what we talk about, make sure you keep that name and are aware of them. I posted the PowerPoint on the website so you will have access to it, but that's the gentleman that created the tool and takes all the data and helps out, and he's very easy to work with. And the staff and administration of the alt ed schools working to support students. So if you probably saw the thing, you saw the learning objectives, we're going to talk about potential implication of staff beliefs and attitudes. We know we don't have effective implementation if we don't have staff buying into it. We're going to learn about the PBIS, ACT. It's a survey that really drills into staff beliefs and then review some results for over a 1 year period. And then how can we really address staff buy-in? So what we do know, the best planned reforms cannot achieve success without teachers committed to altering their practices and learning approaches. And a lot of times, sometimes with MTSS behavior, PBIS, we have staff that maybe feels stuff is being done to them. How do we really work with them and support them to get the job done? So what we know about people in alternative education settings a lot of times. And so think about it, if you're in a comprehensive campus, you might be working with some kids that maybe go back and forth between alternative settings. So some of the same belief systems that are in alternative settings are applied to those kids on comprehensive campuses. So, and then also, if we can do it at an alternative setting effectively, can we do it at a secondary setting as well? And my experience is absolutely. So it's a small, varied population with intensive academic, mental health, and behavioral needs. So the kids that are coming out of the comprehensive campuses are over there. At Clark County School District, we've gotten pretty good at identifying and not having a lot of discretionary expulsions, and so having some kids with some pretty significant serious behaviors. We've gone down from 6 alternative education sites for expulsions to we're at 3 right now. The system, a lot of times the systems will use tier 2 approaches we kind of collapse those to tier 1 and tier 2 and use a lot of more individualized interventions, but we also have tier 2 things going on. So those populations, also 2 of the schools that I work with are working on tier 2 and triangulating data and being specific about the kids we're working with. They have significant safety and security concerns, which sometimes is a barrier for staff wanting to do PBIS, and then the intensified perception of punishment versus instruction. Some of the kids that we're working with are the ones that we have problems with on comprehensive campuses, where people maybe don't want, they think they know how to behave and they should be behaving. So what is the real reason you're here at alternative education? Are you here to kind of get punished into behaving? On the outside, we kind of think, no, we're here to teach you, but what's the reality of the situation when we work with kids? What I've learned from doing this survey is there's a lot more buy-in and belief from staff that it works. So I work with 17 schools right now, 4 of them alternative education, 3 of them are the data you'll see today. The population fluctuates between 80 and 200 students, depending on release dates and kids coming in, and we have some kids that are permanent. Staff size can vary 25 to 30 depending on the site, but it can go a little bit lower. Some people are coming in and doing multiple schools. We have discretionary and non-discretionary expulsion. So discretionary or might be fighting and things like that. The non-discretionary are weapons and those issues. And then we have voluntold schools. These schools were voluntold. When you guys did PBIS, how did you get buy-in? How did it originally work when you just introduced the school and said, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? So I started doing coaching 5 years ago. I look at Lauren because she started out down in Clark County with us. And we'd hear from schools. So they'd say, we want to go ahead and implement PBIS. So we'd go in and talk to a leadership team. We'd tell them what it is. Leadership would say, great, we're going to do it. They'd go to the trainings that are similar to what the state puts out and what we see nationally and start implementing. We did that for 2 years. We had some good results, some not as good results. And then the state started helping us, and we would go in, a school would be interested. And we'd also use discipline referral data to identify potential schools. And we would go in, the project facilitators, and go and do a staff-wide introduction to PBIS, and then have them vote if they're willing to implement. Has anyone done that? Because I did your staff-wide? Yes. So there are a lot of models where we do things like that. And I still believe that that's one of the best ways to start getting it into schools. But what are they really voting on? It's an hour-long presentation, 45 minutes. I give them what the basic criteria is, that you're going to do a matrix, you're going to teach it, you're going to have acknowledgement, you're going to have clear discipline policies, and then it's going to be great. But what are they really voting on? They don't.
They're willing to try a new program.
Yeah, but do they even know what it means to try? Yeah, it's great. That team can totally do that over there and implement. So some schools did really well with it, but it still ended up being what are the systems and the practices in place for that school. So we still talk about buy-in. So I'm at Alt Ed, and I'd come in and work with them. I've been working, they didn't even get to vote. They were just restructured, had to reapply for their jobs, and then here we come doing PBIS with them. So it didn't seem like we had a lot of buy-in. So I would come in, and I was constantly doing like a sales job, right? And do they want a sales job from me? Do I look like a person that has any relevance to the context that they're in? So we did that for a year. We were still doing some other stuff. They were implementing, there were some successes, and then we started using a tool that actually looks into breaking in buy-in to 3 things. Are we willing to implement? Do you have social belief, a positive supportive belief about the theories behind PBIS? That we have clear expectations, that we have, that we're going to do direct explicit teaching of those expectations. So that's one piece that we can look at. The next one is, what is your current reported level of implementation? So who's doing it in the classroom? This is one that you guys can look at in any school, is our social proofing. There's a study from Cook et al. That I reference in here later that talks about one of the biggest ways to look at it is sharing the data, having testimonies, what's happening. And then what is your personal value of it? So am I willing to implement it? So the question is, are you willing to implement tangible rewards for expected behaviors? You're going to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being not doing it, 10 being I'm totally on board and I'll run the store. And then current reported implementation, I currently reward students, or I currently reinforce students or remind students of expected behaviors. I currently use the behavioral expectations in the classroom, and then personal value. So the tool we use actually takes that and rates it into 3 different things. We have low level of commitment, which means 49% or half of your people are rating it below 5, I believe it is. Moderate level of commitment, and then a high level of commitment. And we're going to get into that a little bit. This is just the top of the survey. It's an online survey that we sent out to the staff. Dr. Kevin Filter developed it based off some research by Cook et al. About social proofing and different things like that. That's totally free. If you ever Google his name, you can see the sample survey. You have this people take it, he returns a report and gives you different ways to look at things. I'm going to give just a minute to look at this. A little bit easier to look at in front of you than on the screen. This is 3 schools. This is the results from last school year. Maybe a couple more. So you can see there's 3 schools. I have school C, school B, and school A. That top row talks about overall commitment. So this was the 2nd year of implementation for these schools. Actually, school C had tried implementing 1 year prior, but then they were broken up and redone, restructured. So they had a little bit more background, some of the employees, but not everyone. So 2nd year of implementation, and the overall score, the commitment for this school is 85%. Does that sound good? It is, and that's what the research shows from Dr. Kevin Filter. So pretty good scores, but then I can start breaking it down. So it can be broken into directly teaching behavioral expectations, reminding students of behavioral expectations. And then if you look, so if I go down to directly teaching behavioral expectations and I go to that average, that's the average of what people are scoring. So if I come right here, 90%, 89%. You can start seeing we put yellows if it was 60 to 70%, and then reds if it was below 60%, so that we can start looking at it. And then this is the percent of people that scored it 8+. Now I have a really good idea of what people are willing to do and where the breakdown is. So if this school right here, in an alt ed setting, 84% of people are valuing it at 8 or more, 8 to 10. That's really good. That's good information to have. And then when we start talking about social proofing, all of this information was shared with the schools. So now I have some of the naysayers that would be the ones that when I was going in selling my product, now they're hearing other people and they're seeing, hey, it's going on in classrooms. More people are more willing to do it. So I'm going to move ahead and start doing it as well. So what are the areas that you think would you focus on if you were looking at that information for one of those schools? What did?
So wait, the red. So like you have like school A directly teaching the expectation.
Yeah, so that's our current implementation.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Which, that's good to know. Because what it says, the research says, is if I'm willing, that's harder to address than if I'm currently implementing. Currently implementing might have to do with, it's just not part of my practices yet. It hasn't become ingrained in me, or I don't know how to do it. So if I go in and do professional development and support them in certain areas, we can bump that up. What we found is we have a whole, so instead of me going in and selling and being afraid to get out of my own way with schools sometimes, or the team being afraid to get out, we're like, hey, we have schools that are pretty willing to do this. Do you notice any other, yes?
Okay, so Andy, so you can look at like, okay, the tangible awards, like obviously 60% are willing to do it, and then you can go deeper to say why? I mean, is that how you're using this?
Yes. So I start looking at this, and here's one of the other things that comes up in the research, is personnel that are unwilling to reinforce people for following expectations or use tangible rewards are less likely to have value for the other stuff around it. I did not know how significant that was to zero in. As a secondary teacher and a behavior mentor, I say, hey, what's close to school staff's hearts? Discipline. We'll focus on the discipline stuff. They can do a lot of the discipline. We still had to work on different ways to do it effectively and respectfully, but tangible rewards is where we hit. If you look down here, we started coming in and saying, what are our priority areas? Expanding reinforcement was on all three of them, working on that. Which school do you think would be the most concerning? School B. So, and what's nice about it is part of doing this process got me to very much understand how to support an administrator and how to support a school on what they're doing and what the areas were. Any other trends or comments you have about this right now? It's a lot of information. I would say it's something that's valuable to do and to start digging into it. It'll give you a lot of insight and direction to go. Like I said, we had these areas here, but then we also, and I'll talk about how we actually did the staff development. Yes. What we also knew was they didn't think, what it came down to was they were willing to do it. They didn't know if there was any value or if anything would happen with it, especially when we get to an alt-ed setting. Where are those kids going? This is it. You're coming back. But that helps you zero in on what's going on with a school so they can really address things. Yes?
So you mentioned that a school was doing it like year 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like that they did it.
This was, they took this their second year of implementation.
Okay.
Mid-year.
Mid-year.
Yes. They took it mid-year. All of them remained working on tier 1. We were still doing some informal things to help them with tier 2. So here's an interesting thing. If I look at, this is a different slide that I had. This is the triangle data. Thumbs up if you're familiar with triangle data. How many students have 0 to 1 referral, 2 to 5, 6 to 6 or more. So we look at it a little different at alt-ed. We look at it quarterly. So at one school we had 45% of students had 0 to 1 referral, and to get a referral takes a little bit more than even at a comprehensive campus, and then 55% that had 2 to 5 or 6 or more. So significant, versus this one that was at 74% of students had 0 to 1 referral. Which ones do you think which school had which graph?
Probably C is the top.
So C? Yeah. So C over to here? That's correct. That was theirs. And then who had that one? It's B. This one right here. So matches. The outcome data is going to match the level of commitment. And that's what we see. Interestingly, that a lot of the research done on this tool was with the TFI. All 3 schools had really good TFI scores. Why do you think that is? Who's done a TFI, Tiered Fidelity Inventory? It's an assessment check. It's a self-report that you do with the coach.
Well, I mean, I know when we do a TFI, it's our team. And so our team is all on board. They've got the buy-in. So, and they're willing to do all of these things.
Well, this school, it was a lot of negotiation for those scores. So they were probably rating a little bit higher than they thought they were. Now if I look at, this is a comprehensive class school, another middle school that I worked with. They had been implementing, when they took this is their 5th year of implementation. Look at their overall score. And this is a school that has really good discipline data, that has an administrator that's got it down and has been working on it for a long time. So overall, still up here in the 80s, they're doing very well. Look at the area, the same area of disconnect here is tangible rewards. So they are re-hitting that this year hard and making it so that it's contingent. The other thing I found interesting is look how willing this school is to document and do both minor behaviors. In Clark County School District, this year is the first year we've had a system to collect minor classroom behavior incidents. Before we were using a Google form, and only if the school could really manage it. So look at how willing this school is to do it compared to these schools. Thoughts on differences?
What is the 8+? Is that
The 8+ is people on campus. Where's my thing? When they took the survey, 0 to 10 score, I rated that thing at 8, 9, or 10. So there's that many people. So the people that took this, they had really good completion rates, 8, they rated it 8, 9, or 10. Why do you think that is? I know why it is. My first thought, the skeptic in me was like, well, they're good at collecting data because they know then they can get the bad kids to the comprehensive campuses. But that's not actually true, because that principal works really, really hard to keep all kids on campus. They use the data to do tier 2 screening. So then they can start looking for kids and they're actually getting them into. That's what gets a kid into my tier 2 interventions, check in and check out. So a lot of it has to do, so I told you I was selling the program, right? I would go in and I would work on selling it and convincing them that they needed to do this and why. A lot of it has to do with, we're just going to go ahead and do the professional development in the areas, give them the tools, show them data, and then their belief system will come along. So here's our 3 schools again. So if I look at school C, this was last year, so this is the school that we said had the best scores. Look at this year. Still really decent, right? But it is interesting, because what's happening here? This is the school that, oh yeah, we're going to do it on there, was completely on board for doing tangibles, or pretty close to completely on board for doing tangibles. Tickets, they do swag cat, or I'm not going to say the name of the thing. And now we're here. So now the team has an area that can, because this is where I get people to drift. They come off, they're not implementing. We were doing really good for a while, now why are we coming off? So by using this tool, I can start looking at it, and that's what we're going to start looking at right here. What the issue is we have people that aren't being consistent. So kids are getting it that don't need it, or a lot of it, and the kids that should be earning it aren't getting it. So here, with working in, so let me tell you about the professional development we offered. We took this information, we zeroed down. We went in and we gave half-day trainings over a series to the teachers, half in the morning, half in the afternoon, classroom management, de-escalation, reinforcers, different things of value. Then we put social proofing in. So that's when we would have other people start talking about it in testimony. So now, instead of me talking about how valuable it is, it's the teacher next door that's talking about how they're using it. One of the schools here uses Class Dojo at a secondary level in Alt-Ed effectively, where kids know why they're getting it. So that's pretty amazing. And a lot of people, when we first started introducing it, didn't want to do Class Dojo. And the school picked it, not me. Did not want to do it. But now you start coming into professional development together, and you can talk about it. And you can have another teacher that's in the context saying, this is how I use it, and this is how it's working. We also did ratios of interactions, so how many positive statements there were to how many corrective statements during walkthroughs. We did that every professional development. So you started seeing, I'm going to get on board and start doing it. So addressing buy-in, you can look at specific things, and you have to get social proofing. That's when it's the key elements, and then the consistency by actually giving them the professional development. So here's our School B, last year versus this year. The biggest effects. The other two stayed relatively stable. This one was just night and day, and it is night and day what's going on in that. This is where I also know, and this, the nuances of what's going on in school and what really leads to change. We had an administrator change here. Same exact staff. So, the previous administrator was good as well. Maybe just didn't understand the cycle of bringing people in, having discussions, doing that professional development. And this new administrator moves fast, brings them in, gets feedback from people. So questions or thoughts? It's just like it's data overload, isn't it? It is. And I will say, when Jody first showed me this, I just looked the other way. I'm not doing that. I don't need to do it. And then I started thinking, let's start bringing it in and then diving through. The report doesn't look like this, but this is the report I put together to kind of expand on it and help drive it. Lauren's laughing because she knows.
Of course. Of course it looks so beautiful because
Yes.
Is there any demographic correlations, like what schools these are? Like Title I or free or reduced lunch or?
So they're alternative education. I would say that I don't have the exact statistics, but probably 90% are free and reduced lunch. Disproportionate amount of kids are African American, Hispanic. I mean, it's a different, it's all the disproportionality stuck into one school. So, and one of the schools is the discretionary one. So it's the first stop at Central in Las Vegas. So it's kids in Clark County. So it's kids from all over the school district. And then we have one of the schools is in the Northwest, which can be repeat offenders or non-discretionary expulsions, and then in the southwest of town. So they're coming from all over. So, and if I look at the staff, they are all, when I talk about even restructuring, so they restructured the schools 2 years ago, they just kind of moved staff around. Because what we had was actually good staff, but our practices had gotten stagnant and more punitive. So staff has moved around, same kind of people that's in there. Other things, other questions or thoughts? So the first thing is, well, what's my easiest things to change? I had said it earlier. Did you? If I'm looking at willingness, current implementation, or value? Current implementation. So that's what we zoomed in on first. What can I go with that? I'm going to give them, because that's going to be, maybe I don't have the skills to do it, or it's not part of my practices. So that's going to just be my staff development is on that current implementation. I didn't sell anybody anything. I don't sell it anymore to the schools. I still have to go out and do pitches, but if you know me, I'm not going to sell it anymore if you see me more than once. And then the second thing is that willingness. And that's where we do the social proofing. But then I can also drill, like I said, we had these things that we could come in and work on.
So, yeah,
Yes.
Take it then back to take this information and take it back to like the team,
Mhm.
and then do they bring it to the staff as well to be like, okay, what are our next steps, or like what?
So
How did you do that?
we worked as an alt-ed leadership group to go through this and come up with targets and things like that. Then I took it down into the school teams with those administrators. I did the professional development, so I shared the information. At this point, this year, they'll be sharing that information. But they get a little bit more intensive coaching from the external person for the alt-ed settings. Plus, that's where I love to be, secondary or alt-ed. But now had I not done that, it would not have, I don't think it would have gone in very far at all. We would have had this nice report, looked at it, and gone nowhere with it. And then implementing it the second time to see where the improvement was or see where we were starting to drift and drop so we can use it for PD. So back to this one. Am I willing to implement current reported implementation and personal value? The ones that we want to work on for willingness, I said again, was that social proofing. So I'm going to have testimonies from teachers, and I'm going to share data, a lot of data, from office discipline referrals to ratio walks to that data. Current reported implementation is where we give them the actual skills to do it and still work on that. And then the personal value, they get personal value comes along once the practices start paying off for them. That's weird how it did that. So using survey results, that question you kind of just gave me right there was you got to have the schools be using them. Participation rates are also important because, so the one school, School A in here, that I think actually had a little bit of decline that was fairly good, they had 50% of, no, it was School C that we said was the best one. They had 50% commitment or participation last year, which is a good participation rate according to Dr. Filter. And then this year they had 90%. And and it still stayed pretty much the same. So if you can get at least 50%, and it goes to support staff, it goes to everybody. Custodial, support staff, teachers, we want everyone to do it. It will break it down into also your buy-in for support staff versus licensed personnel, which is good information. Because especially on a comprehensive campus, who do we miss giving professional development to? And how much interaction do support staff have with our students? And then these are the three kind of things that Dr. Filter's stuff was based on, the series, and then where we kind of springboarded off on what we were working with the schools, the theory of planned behavior, which I've mentioned multiple times. This addresses my intention to do, and that first willingness one. And so that's why we went ahead and did all of the sharing data, having testimony, things like that. There is, if you went and looked up Cook's study, a supportive beliefs intervention that they talk about, where we have teachers build kind of mock simulations of the perfect robot teacher and different things like that. We didn't do that because I didn't know how well it would fly, but we did do a lot of design your perfect classroom. What would you want it to look like? What would it sound like? And things like that. And then PD and coaching is where we actually get consistency and working with them. So PD followed by coaching, so I come back in, or we also have instructional people there that would go in and be coaching, and then followed by admin walks, looking for evidence or practices, and PLCs, so planned learning communities. And 2 of the schools have broken down their whole staff into subcommittees. So we have a subcommittee that works on our matrix and lesson plans and actually drilling down and doing even more intensive ones. We have a subcommittee that works on reinforcement, one that works on responses to crises and different things like that. So we've embedded and gotten the whole staff involved in that. Data use, if we do this and we don't dig down into it, it's not going to have any effect for us. Shared decision making, that's also where it happened. I'm going to be willing to implement if I'm part of one of the decision makers. So that's one of the things that school B that had the most concerning buy-in rates, commitment rates to things. That's one of the things that they've done. Those teachers now come in, they've rebuilt their discipline system, they've rebuilt how they're providing feedback. They do check-in, check-out. They had done it for 2 years, they rebuilt how that looks, but it's now the teachers doing it. So that's another thing that I think sometimes teams and schools get worried about. Are we going to put one more thing on the people's plates? Because we know the teachers have a initiative fatigue and everything else. But once they start making it, then they own it. And then the role that it can help with leadership. So all 3 of these administrators understand now, or the areas they can tweak and how they can set up their staff to do it. One of the reasons why school B had the lower scores was that principal did so much. He didn't want to help it wasn't that he didn't want teachers to have a voice, because he took care of his teachers very well. It was that he didn't want to overburden them and overwhelm them. This new principal has come in and they're like, oh, you're going to talk about it. What do we want to happen when we have a kid do certain behaviors? And we're going to own it. So, questions? You guys are very quiet.
What was the time between when you took it the first time and the second time?
So I think we took it in January of last year, and then they just completed it about 2 weeks ago. So about 8 months. So the principals did ask to take it again. So we took it in January and they wanted to take it in March or May, and we said, no, that's not enough time. So fairly quick turnaround on that school B. Okay, I'll ask you. How willing are you to do this to one of your schools? Use this tool with a school?
How many questions?
Hmm?
How many questions? I mean, how lengthy is it? Like, what?
It's eight questions in 3 areas. So how willing are you to directly teach behavioral expectations? What's your current level of behavioral expectation? More studies, and they're working on, they actually use that data. So they ask administration to approve the information for their research, but if they decline, you can still take it and he will still provide that report. I mean, it's confidential, it's great information. The more he can zero in and give us a tool to look at buy-in, the better off we are. So other barriers, so questions about it that would, so who's gonna go implement this and use it? One person? One, because she knows me. So that was the 90% participation rate this year. The principal had forgotten to do it, and I called him and I said, it's closing tomorrow, what's going on? And so in the morning, he said, everyone get on your computers right now and take the survey. And then it was 90%. So office staff, everyone. Didn't have a meeting, but it was just done. So on an alt-ed setting, it's probably easier to do that. I've seen schools, like I think the one comprehensive campus, put one person in charge of it, and then kind of brought people in during their preps and did it, and then brought the support staff in after school started and had them do it very quickly. Other barriers to doing it? Benefits? Right, so that's what I would be doing with schools is I would be saying, I think there's a buy-in problem. Like, you should see the 3 guys at the back of the road that room that kind of heckle me when I do presentations. And then the data doesn't lie. The other thing is it kind of shows sometimes where it is. We knew that some of the breakdown at the one school was with this documentation and things had to do with communication between leadership. So it's not all about what staff isn't doing, it's how we're supporting staff. So it becomes, you know, like if we use data, we know it, it's not threatening, it's just a tool. So, any more questions? We will wrap up then. Thank you.